My daughter pretended not to know me at Christmas, but a $500,000 bill gave me my power back. I never imagined the hands that denied me would be the same ones that signed my name without permission. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I would share. And if you for just a second feel like this sounds familiar, I only ask that you leave a like and subscribe. You'll be helping me continue to unburden myself. It's 5 in the morning in Austin, Texas, and my wrinkled hands are already kneading the masa for the Christmas tamales. The steam from the corn dough rises from the clay pot I inherited from my mother, and the aroma of ancho chiles mixes with the cinnamon-spiced coffee simmering on the stove. My name is Helen Grace Baker. I'm 67 years old, and for the last 30 years, every Christmas has been a symphony of silent sacrifices that no one in my family seems to hear. My fingers, swollen with arthritis but still skilled, wrap each tamal with the precision of someone who has repeated this ritual thousands of times. Corn husks I bought yesterday at the farmer's market, where Mrs. Gable asked me, as she does every year, "How many are you feeding, Helen?" And I, like every year, replied, "For 30 people." Though deep down I knew only 6 would show up, and of those 6, 3 would be more interested in their phones than the food I prepared with so much love. The kitchen clock reads 7:30 a.m. when I finish wrapping the last tamal. My back cracks like the dry leaves in the yard when I straighten up, but I smile seeing the mountain of small golden parcels arranged in the steamer. Each one represents a silent prayer, that this year will be different, that my children will hug me like they used to, that my grandchildren will run to me shouting "Grandma" instead of whispering "hi" without looking up from their screens. I shower with the rose-scented soap I buy at the flea market every month, the same kind I used when my children were little and would snuggle in my bed after their bath, asking me to tell them the story of the prince who fell in love with the farthest star in the sky. Now, as the warm water falls on my tired shoulders, I wonder when they stopped asking for stories and started asking for money. I put on my navy blue dress, the one with small hand-embroidered flowers on the collar. It's the same one I wore last year, and the year before, and the year before that. Not because I don't have others, but because it's the only one Sophia, my eldest daughter, ever told me looked nice on me. That was 8 years ago, during one of those rare occasions when she visited without needing something specific from me. By 11 a.m., I'm loading the Tupperware containers full of food into the car. My 2003 Toyota Corolla protests when I start it, but it's as faithful as an old dog. I drive through the Austin streets I know by heart. South Congress Avenue, where I used to walk with my young children to see the Christmas window displays. Loop 360, where I worked for 15 years cleaning offices to afford their private school. And finally, Westlake Drive, towards the neighborhood where Sophia lives in a 2-story house that, I would later find out, is in my name without my knowledge. The gated community, the estates at Barton Creek, smells of money and exclusivity. The lawns are perfectly manicured, the sidewalks immaculate, and every house looks like it's from an interior design magazine. Sophia's house, with its Texas limestone facade and wrought iron gate, always makes me feel small, as if my presence is a mistake in the perfect landscape she has built. I ring the doorbell at 12:30 p.m., just as we had agreed. The December sun in Austin is deceptively warm, and I feel sweat forming on my forehead as I carry the heavy bags. I hear footsteps on the other side of the door, voices I can't quite make out, and finally, the deadbolt turning. But the person who opens the door isn't Sophia. It's Robert, her husband of 12 years, a tall, thin man who always greets me with the cold cordiality of someone performing a social duty without any real affection. Today, however, something is different. His gaze is strange, as if he's looking at a complete stranger standing on his doorstep. "Excuse me? Can I help you?" he says, with a forced smile that doesn't reach his eyes. I feel a strange coldness in my stomach, like when a doctor looks at you in that way that means the news isn't going to be good. "It's Helen, Sophia's mom. I'm here for Christmas dinner," I reply, holding up the bags as proof of my identity, as if the food I prepared is my family ID card. Robert frowns, and for a moment, I see something that looks like genuine confusion in his eyes. He turns his head back into the house and calls out, "Honey, there's a woman here who says she's your mom. Do you have a mom?" Time stops. The bags suddenly feel heavier in my hands. The sun no longer warms my back. It burns me like a cruel magnifying glass, focusing all the humiliation onto one specific point in my chest, right where my broken heart is beating. And then I hear the voice of Sophia, my baby girl, my blood, the one I nursed for 2 years and carried in my arms when she had pneumonia at age 5. Her voice comes through, clear and cold, from the living room. I don't know who that could be. Maybe she has the wrong house. Tell her no one by that name lives here. The bags slip from my hands and fall to the ground with a dull thud. The containers pop open, and the red sauce from the tamales spills onto the concrete like blood. Robert looks at me with a mixture of pity and discomfort, and for a second, I think I see a flash of shame in his eyes. "I'm sorry, ma'am. There must be some mistake," he mutters, starting to close the door. I bend down to pick up the spilled containers, my hands trembling like leaves in the wind. "I'm sorry," I whisper, though I don't know exactly what I'm apologizing for. For existing? For coming? For spending 3 days cooking for ghosts? I walk back to the car like a sleepwalker. The neighborhood's Christmas lights blink cheerfully, mocking my pain. A family walks by, laughing, and the father carries his little girl on his shoulders. She shouts, "Daddy, Daddy," with the pure joy of someone who knows she is loved unconditionally. Inside the car, with the engine off and my hands on the steering wheel, I allow the tears to fall for the first time. I don't cry like they do in the movies, with dramatic sobs. I cry the way women of my generation cry, in silence, swallowing the pain so no one else has to carry it. That night, I didn't sleep a wink. I sat on the edge of my bed, still in my blue dress, hugging the apron stained with chili and masa. The silence of my house in East Riverside felt different, heavier, as if the walls had absorbed all the day's humiliation and were now reflecting it back at me, magnified. I looked at the photographs on my nightstand. There was Sophia at 5, with her messy pigtails and a toothless grin, hugging me after I'd cleaned her scraped knee. At 15, at her middle school graduation, crying with happiness because she was the valedictorian. At 25, on her wedding day, whispering in my ear, "Thank you, Mom, for everything," as she squeezed my hand. When did that little girl who adored me turn into the woman who denied me as if I were a stranger? I remembered the first time Sophia asked to borrow money. She was 28 and had just finished the business degree I paid for by selling breakfast tacos outside Austin High for 5 years. Every dollar I made from those greasy tacos went straight to her tuition, her books, her supplies. I ate beans and tortillas so she could have lunch at the university cafeteria like her classmates. "Mom, I need $10,000 for a down payment on a condo," she had said that March afternoon, sitting in the very kitchen where I now reflected on my pain. "It's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. If I don't take it now, it'll be gone." I didn't have $10,000. I didn't even have $1,000. But the next day, I was at the bank, taking out a home equity loan on the house my late husband Edward and I had spent 20 years paying off. The house where I raised my children, where Edward died of cancer in my arms, where every corner held memories of a family I believed was solid and indestructible. "It's just temporary, Mom. In 6 months, I'll pay you back everything. With interest," Sophia had promised, kissing my forehead with that smile that always melted my resistance. 6 months turned into 2 years. 2 years turned into, "Mom, I'm going through a rough patch." And then, the topic was simply never mentioned again, as if that $10,000 had been a gift I was obligated to give without expecting anything in return. Then came Daniel, my younger son, my eternal baby, as I used to call him when he was little, and hid behind my skirt whenever company came over. Daniel, who could never hold a job for more than 6 months, who always had a new business idea that required just a small initial investment from me. "Mom, I'm going to start a gourmet food truck," he had told me 3 years ago, with that contagious energy that always made me believe this time it would work. "I just need $15,000 for the truck and equipment. It's going to be the best business in the neighborhood." I sold the gold watch Edward had given me for our 20th anniversary. I sold the new television I had worked so hard to buy. I even sold my engagement ring, that small but brilliant circle that represented the only 2 truly happy years of my marriage. before responsibilities and children turned us into survival partners more than lovers. Daniel's food truck lasted 4 months. People just don't appreciate quality, was his explanation as I cleaned the greasy pans and rusted grills left over from his failed dream with my own hands. And so, year after year, every one of my children's emergencies became my emergency. Each of their financial crises meant another piece of my assets was sold, mortgaged, or given away. When Sophia got pregnant with Alexandra, my granddaughter, she needed money for a private hospital because public hospitals are awful, Mom. When Daniel got in an accident on his motorcycle, I paid for the clinic and the months of rehab because, I don't have insurance. But what hurt the most wasn't the money. It was the way that, little by little, I had stopped being their mother and had become their personal ATM. The calls only came when they needed something. The visits were reduced to awkward encounters where I pretended not to notice them scanning my house with the eyes of an appraiser, calculating what else they could ask for next time. I remembered the last birthday of Alexandra, my 12-year-old granddaughter. I had saved for 6 months to buy her a pink bicycle I had seen in a downtown shop window, the same one she had pointed to with excitement during one of our rare walks together, back when she still sought me out to talk about her problems at school and her dreams of being a veterinarian. I arrived at the party with the bike wrapped in gold paper, imagining her happy face. But when Alexandra opened the gift, she just said, "Thanks, Grandma," without looking up from her new phone. An iPhone Sophia had just given her that cost 3 times what I had spent on the bicycle. "Mom, she's too old for bikes now," Sophia had whispered in my ear, with that condescending smile she used when she wanted to make me feel old and out of place. Kids prefer technology these days. That night when I got home, I put the pink bike in the spare room where it still sits, collecting dust along with all my other failed attempts to buy my family's love. I got up from the bed and walked to the kitchen. I needed a cup of chamomile tea to calm the knot in my stomach that had taken hold of me since the afternoon. While I waited for the water to boil, I looked at the calendar on the wall. Tomorrow was December 26th, the day after Christmas. The day we traditionally gathered again to finish the leftovers and laugh about the stories from the night before. Would there be any stories this year? Were they laughing at me? Were they telling the story of the crazy old lady who showed up with food claiming to be Sophia's mom? The water boiled, and the kettle's whistle pulled me from my torturous thoughts. I made my tea and sat at the kitchen table, the same one where I had comforted Sophia when her first boyfriend broke up with her, where I had helped Daniel with the math homework he never understood, where I had ironed uniforms and packed lunches for endless years of dedicated motherhood. That's when I saw the white envelope under the front door. It hadn't been there when I arrived. Someone had slipped it under while I was lost in my painful memories. I approached with hesitant steps and picked it up. My name was written in large letters, Mrs. Helen Grace Baker. The bank's logo was printed in the top right corner, and the weight of the envelope suggested important documents inside. With trembling hands, I opened the envelope. Inside was an official letter and several documents that I didn't understand at first. Technical words, enormous numbers, references to properties and mortgages. But as I read, a horrific reality began to take shape before my eyes. Sophia's house, that mansion in the estates where I had been humiliated that very afternoon, was registered in my name. There was a $500,000 mortgage that I had supposedly signed 8 months ago, and the payments were 3 months overdue. According to these documents, I owed $500,000 for a house I had never lived in, had never seen the inside of, and whose existence I only knew from the rare occasions I visited my daughter. The tea grew cold in my hands as I read the papers over and over, hoping the words would change, that they would rearrange themselves into something that made sense. But they didn't change. My signature was there, at the bottom of every document. A signature I had no memory of ever writing. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed at the kitchen table until the sun began to filter through the faded curtains, reading and rereading those cursed documents that had arrived like messenger crows of my own destruction. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my signature at the bottom of each page, that script I knew so well, but couldn't recall ever having traced. At 7 in the morning, I called the bank. The operator put me on hold for 20 minutes with that unbearable music that seems designed to break the patience of debtors. When they finally answered, A young, disinterested voice confirmed what I already knew but didn't want to accept. Yes, Mrs. Baker. You applied for a mortgage loan of $500,000 in April of this year. The property is registered at 2847 Patria Avenue in the Estates at Barton Creek. The monthly payments are $3,200, and you are 3 months behind. If you do not rectify your situation in the next 10 days, we will proceed with foreclosure. $3,200 a month, more than my entire pension, more than I had earned in my best month selling breakfast tacos, an impossible amount that someone had committed to using my name, my credibility, my future. Excuse me, could you tell me who was present when this loan was signed? I asked, though deep down I already knew the answer. According to our records, you came accompanied by your daughter, Mrs. Sofia Hernandez, who acted as a witness and co-signer. She presented her financial statements to support the loan. Co-signer. The words echoed in my head like a funeral bell. Sofia hadn't just used my name to get the house. She had also put her own assets up as collateral. This meant that if I didn't pay, she would lose everything too. And yet, she had denied me as if I were a stranger. I hung up the phone and went to the bathroom. My reflection in the mirror showed me a woman who had aged 10 years in one night. My eyes, swollen from tears and lack of sleep, looked like someone who had just woken up from a nightmare, only to find that reality was worse. I dressed in my most formal white blouse and gray skirt, the same outfit I wore for bank appointments or important doctor's visits. If I was going to confront my daughter, I wanted to do it with my dignity intact, even if I felt completely shattered inside. The drive to the estates felt eternal. Every traffic light, every turn, every familiar street brought me closer to a confrontation I had been avoiding my whole life. I was one of those mothers who would rather swallow her complaints than create conflict, who smiled when they wanted to cry, who said, "It's okay," when nothing was okay. But you can't swallow $500,000. You can't ignore a house in your name. A betrayal of this magnitude cannot be forgiven with smiles and silence. I parked the Corolla in front of the house that, according to the bank papers, was mine, but where yesterday I had been treated like an intruder. The Texas limestone facade gleamed in the morning sun, mocking my poverty. It was a beautiful house, I admit. The kind of house I had dreamed of having when I was young and believed that honest work and unconditional love were enough to build a dignified life. I rang the bell with a firm finger, though my heart was beating like a war drum. This time I wasn't carrying bags of food. This time I was carrying something much heavier, the truth. Robert opened the door, and upon seeing me, his expression changed immediately. There was no longer confusion in his eyes, but something akin to guilt. Or maybe fear. "Helen, what a surprise," he muttered, partially blocking the entrance with his body. "Sofia isn't here. That's a lie," I replied with a calmness that surprised me. "Her car is in the driveway, and I can hear the TV in the living room. I need to speak with her. Now." Robert hesitated for a moment, clearly weighing his options. Finally, he stepped aside, but his body language radiated discomfort. I entered the house that was supposedly mine for the first time. The interior was even more impressive than the facade. Marble floors, designer furniture, a spiral staircase that went up to the second floor, like in a Hollywood movie. All paid for with my name, my credit, my phantom signature. Sofia was in the living room, lounging on a beige leather sofa that probably cost more than my entire house. She was wearing a blue silk robe and holding a cup of coffee. When she saw me, she sat up abruptly, spilling some of the coffee on her robe. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice trying to sound authoritative but betraying her nervousness. I took the bank documents out of my purse and threw them onto the glass coffee table, where they landed with a sharp crack that echoed through the room. "That's what I came to ask you," I replied, pointing at the papers. "What are you doing living in a house that's in my name? What are you doing signing documents with my identity? What are you doing being in debt for $500,000 that I will have to pay?" Sofia looked at the documents without touching them, as if they were venomous snakes that might bite her. Her face turned pale, but she quickly composed herself and adopted that look of superiority she had perfected over the years. "Mom, don't make a scene," she said with the condescending tone she used to minimize my concerns. It was just a formality. We needed the loan, and my salary alone wasn't enough to qualify. Robert is a freelance accountant, and his income is irregular. But you have a clean credit history, and your pension gives you stability. Just a formality? I repeated, feeling anger begin to boil in my stomach. $500,000 is just a formality? Look, it's done. We can't go back in time, Sophia continued, getting up from the sofa and walking to the window as if the conversation bored her. We pay the monthly bills. You don't have to worry about anything. It's like you're a partner in the house. Then why did you pretend not to know me yesterday? The question landed like a bomb in the middle of the room. Sophia froze by the window, her back to me. Robert, who had been watching from the entryway, cleared his throat uncomfortably. That was a misunderstanding, Sophia murmured without turning to look at me. A misunderstanding? My voice rose without me being able to control it. Your husband asking if you have a mother is a misunderstanding? You telling him you don't know who I am is a misunderstanding? She finally turned to me, and in her eyes, I saw something I had never seen before. Pure contempt. Not sadness, not guilt, not remorse. Contempt. Do you want me to tell you the truth, Mom? Her voice turned as cold as ice. Robert had important guests over yesterday. Potential clients for his firm. Educated people. With money. With class. I couldn't introduce you as my mother in front of them. The world stopped. The words floated in the air like sharp daggers, each one finding its target in my already shattered heart. And why not? Because look at how you dress. Because you talk like you're from the wrong side of the tracks. Because you show up with plastic Tupperware and homemade food. Because you're embarrassing. Embarrassing. The word stabbed my soul like a rusty nail. I, who had worked 18-hour days to give her an education. I, who had sold my jewelry so she could study in private schools. I, who had sacrificed my dreams so she could achieve hers. I was embarrassing. The guests asked why there was an old woman with food at the door. Sophia continued with a cruelty that seemed to release years of pent-up resentment. I had to make up a story that you were a confused neighbor. I couldn't tell them you were my mother because you just don't fit into my life now. Robert shifted uncomfortably, clearly wishing he were anywhere else. But he said nothing to defend the woman who had helped finance his upper-middle-class lifestyle. I just stood there, in the middle of that luxurious living room that was technically mine, but where I felt like an intruder, processing the fact that my own daughter was ashamed of me, that she would rather deny me than admit where she came from, how she had gotten to where she was. I understand, I finally said, my voice sounding strangely calm for all the chaos raging inside me. I understand perfectly, and I did understand. I understood that for years I had been useful only for my money, my ability to solve emergencies, my willingness to sacrifice without asking questions. But socially, emotionally, I was a liability to be hidden when important people came over. I gathered the documents from the table and put them back in my purse. Sophia watched me with a mixture of relief and caution, probably hoping I would leave without making any more of a scene. I just want you to know something, I said as I walked to the door. This house is in my name. According to the law, I am the legal owner. And the $500,000 debt is also mine. So we're going to have to resolve this, one way or another. The look of relief on Sophia's face immediately transformed into worry. What do you mean by that? I mean, I'm no longer your embarrassing mother who swallows everything in silence. Now I'm your creditor. And that, my dear daughter, changes the rules of the game entirely. The following days were like living in the eye of a hurricane. My phone wouldn't stop ringing, but they were no longer the sporadic calls asking for money or favors. Now it was pure panic on the other end of the line. Sophia called me at 6 the next morning, her voice cracking in a way I hadn't heard since she was a little girl waking from a nightmare. Mom, please, we need to talk. Come to the house. I'll explain everything. No, I replied with a firmness that surprised me. If you want to talk to me, you come to my house. Like you did when you were little and needed me to comfort you. There was a long silence on the other end. Sophia wasn't used to me telling her no. In her 35 years of life, I think that was the first time I hadn't immediately given in to her demands. Fine, I'll be there. She arrived an hour later, but not alone. She came with Robert and with Daniel, my younger son. Apparently, they had held a crisis family meeting, and I was the problem they all needed to solve. The three of them sat in my small living room like a tribunal, with the grave faces people put on when they're about to explain why what you're feeling is wrong and what they did was justified. Daniel, my eternal baby, spoke first. At 32, he still had that helpless child face he used when he wanted to manipulate my emotions. "Mom, Sophia told me what happened. I think you're blowing things out of proportion. She was just trying to protect you." "Protect me?" The words escaped my mouth as a bitter laugh. "Protect me from what?" "From her work colleagues," Robert interjected, adjusting his glasses as if about to give a lecture. "They're very sophisticated people. They wouldn't have understood your way of being. Sophia just wanted to spare you an uncomfortable situation." There it was again. My way of being. As if being authentic, simple, and hardworking was a flaw that others needed to be protected from. And using my name to buy a house without telling me? Was that to protect me too? The three of them exchanged glances. Sophia cleared her throat and adopted the tone she used when she wanted to seem reasonable and mature. "Mom, listen to me. The loan was available and we needed it. You have good credit, but you don't need a house like this. It was logical to put the property in your name." "Without asking me. We knew you'd say yes. You always say yes to everything we ask." The sentence hit me like a slap. They were right. I always said yes. But they had never given me the chance to say no to something as big as this. Daniel leaned forward, taking my hands in his with that calculated tenderness he had perfected since childhood. "Mommy, look. I know you're hurt, but think about it. Now you technically own a house in the best part of the city. It's like you're a millionaire. A house with a $500,000 debt that I have to pay. But we make the monthly payments," Sophia insisted. "Or we were. We've had some financial trouble lately, but we're going to sort it out." Some financial trouble? I pulled out the bank statements I had requested that morning. "You haven't paid in 3 months. 3 months where I knew nothing about this debt that's in my name." Robert sighed with the exaggerated patience adults use when explaining something obvious to a slow child. "Helen, I understand your confusion, but legally, everything is in order. Your signature is on the documents. The loan was approved because you applied for it. There's nothing illegal here." "My signature?" I stood up from the couch, feeling the blood rush to my head. "When did I sign those documents? Where was I when I supposedly went to the bank to apply for a $500,000 loan?" All three fell silent. It was the first time someone had asked them directly about the process, and they didn't have a prepared answer for such a simple question. "We took you to the bank," Sophia finally mumbled. "You went with us." "When?" "In April. On a Saturday morning." I closed my eyes, trying to remember. April. What had happened in April? And suddenly I remembered. The supposed medical emergency with Alexandra, my granddaughter. "You told me Alexandra was in the hospital," I whispered, more to myself than to them. "You said she had appendicitis and needed emergency surgery. You asked me to go with you to sign some health insurance papers." The silence that followed was so thick you could have cut it with a knife. Daniel avoided my gaze. Robert took off his glasses and cleaned them obsessively. Sophia was biting her lower lip, just like she did as a child when she knew she'd done something wrong. "There was no medical emergency," I continued, feeling the pieces of the puzzle fall into place in my mind. "Alexandra was perfectly fine. You invented an emergency to get me to the bank and make me sign documents I thought were for my granddaughter's insurance." "Mom," Daniel started, but I cut him off. "Where is Alexandra now? Does she know her parents used her name to defraud me?" "It wasn't fraud," Sophia exploded, finally losing her composure. "It was a financial strategy. We all benefited." "All of us? How do I benefit from having a debt I can't possibly pay? Because you're now the owner of a house worth twice what we owe. A house I can't live in because you're ashamed of me." The words came out with more pain than I had intended. The three of them fell silent again, but this time there was something different in the air. Something like guilt. Just then, there was a knock at the door. Daniel went to open it and came back with Alexandra, my 12-year-old granddaughter. She was wearing her school uniform and a pink backpack I had given her last year. "Grandma!" she yelled when she saw me, running to me with a spontaneity only children possess. She threw her arms around my neck and gave me a kiss on the cheek. "I'm so glad you're here. I wanted to tell you I got an A on the math test you helped me study for." I looked at Sophia over Alexandra's head. My granddaughter knew nothing of what had happened. To her, I was still just her grandma who helped with homework and bought her gifts with money I didn't have. "Alexandra, go do your homework," Sophia said in a tense voice. "The adults are talking about important things. Can I stay with Grandma? I haven't seen her in a while." "No, sweetie. Go to your room." Alexandra shuffled away, clearly disappointed. When she disappeared down the hall, I turned back to my children. "That girl truly loves me," I said quietly. "She's the only person in this family who doesn't see me as an ATM or a social embarrassment." "Mom, don't say that," Daniel mumbled. "We love you too." "You love me? Or do you love my money, my house, my credit, my ability to solve your problems?" "The two aren't mutually exclusive," Robert said with the cold logic he used to justify the unjustifiable. "Oh, they're not? Then prove it. Sell the house, pay off the debt, and let's see if you still call me for anything that isn't about money." Sophia stood up abruptly. "We're not selling the house. It's our home. We worked for years to get it, with my name and my credit. But with our effort, with our sacrifices." The word sacrifices coming from my daughter's mouth provoked a laugh that sounded more like the growl of a wounded animal. "Sacrifices? You want to talk about sacrifices? I sold my wedding earrings to pay for your degree. I sold your father's engagement ring for Daniel's failed business. I mortgaged the house where your father died to give you the down payment on your first apartment. I worked selling breakfast tacos under the hot Texas sun so you could eat lunch at the university cafeteria like your rich friends." My voice grew louder with each word, years of silent resentment finally bubbling to the surface. "I know sacrifices, daughter. What you did was not a sacrifice. It was theft, using my forged signature and my betrayed trust." Daniel tried to intervene again. "Mom, we understand you're upset, but we can fix this. We can make a payment plan. We can—" "No," I interrupted him. "You will no longer decide for me what we can do. You will no longer use my name without my permission. You will no longer be ashamed of me when it's convenient and use me when you need me." I walked to the door, indicating that the conversation was over. "You have 1 week to decide what you're going to do about that debt. If not, I will make my own legal decisions." "Are you threatening us?" Sophia asked in disbelief. "No, daughter. I'm informing you. There's a difference." The three of them left my house with faces of confusion and panic. It was the first time in their lives that Mom hadn't caved, hadn't absorbed the problem, hadn't said, "It's okay, don't worry." When they closed the door, I was left alone in my living room, surrounded by a silence that once felt empty, but now felt full of possibility. For the first time in years, I had set a boundary. For the first time in my life, I had said no to my children. And even though my heart ached, I also felt something I hadn't experienced in decades: self-respect. The week that followed was the strangest of my life. For the first time in decades, my phone remained silent. No one called to borrow money, to ask me to watch the grandkids, to have me solve some domestic emergency. It was as if I had disappeared from the family map, and that absence produced a contradictory mix of relief and melancholy. On Monday morning, I did something I hadn't done in years. I stayed in bed until 9, not because I was sick or depressed, but simply because I had no urgent obligations waiting for me. No one had dropped off grandkids the night before so they could take care of some things. No one had woken me with a 5 a.m. emergency call. I made myself coffee slowly, using the French press I'd bought 2 years ago, but never had time to use because I was always running to solve someone else's crisis. The coffee tasted different when you weren't drinking it in a hurry, when you could savor it while watching the hummingbirds visit the bougainvillea in the yard. At 10, I walked to downtown Austin. It had been months since I'd gone downtown without a specific mission: picking up medicine for someone, paying a bill my children couldn't afford, finding a gift for a birthday they had forgotten. This time, I went just because I wanted to walk, because I wanted to remember what it felt like to move through the world without carrying the weight of others' needs on my shoulders. I sat on a bench in a park, facing the state capitol, and watched people go by. Street vendors selling corn on the cob and snow cones, tourists taking pictures, families strolling with children chasing pigeons. Normal, everyday life, with no drama or financial emergencies. That's where I met Arthur. He was sitting on the next bench, a man in his 70s with a white mustache and a flat cap that made him look like a retired professor. He was reading a newspaper and occasionally muttering comments about the news, apparently to himself. "These politicians," he grumbled after reading something that annoyed him, "they promise you the moon but only know how to line their own pockets." I laughed unintentionally. The comment reminded me of my late husband, Edward, who had the same habit of arguing with the newspaper as if the journalists could hear him. "You find corruption funny, ma'am?" Arthur asked with a smile that showed he wasn't truly angry. "I find it funny that you talk to the newspaper just like my husband used to," I replied. "He fought with the news every morning, too." "Well, a man gets indignant," he explained, folding the paper and putting it in a tote bag. "Even if there's no point in getting indignant at this age." We talked for an hour about everything and nothing. He told me he was a retired accountant, that he'd been widowed for 5 years, that his children lived out of state and visited once a year more out of obligation than affection. I told him I was also a widow, but omitted the details about my children. For some reason, I didn't want to burden a stranger with my family problems. "Do you know what I miss most about being married?" he asked, as we bought roasted corn from a vendor who passed our bench. "What?" "The stupid arguments. My wife and I would fight over the silliest things. Whether to water the plants in the morning or the evening, whether the chicken was better roasted or fried, whether to watch the news before or after dinner. I thought when she died, I would miss the kisses and hugs. But what I miss most are those absurd fights that made every day unpredictable." His words touched something deep inside me. Edward and I also had those insignificant arguments that now, in retrospect, seemed like the luxury of a genuinely shared life. "My children never fight with me," I said without thinking. "They always agree on everything. They always say yes to everything." "That sounds suspicious," Arthur replied shrewdly. "People who never fight with you over the little things are usually just waiting for you to give them something big." The observation hit me like a punch to the gut. He was right. Sophia and Daniel never argued with me about opinions, tastes, or daily decisions. They accepted my views, my food, my gifts, my help, with a docility that I now realized was more strategic than affectionate. "What's your take on forgiveness?" I asked him suddenly. Arthur thoughtfully chewed a kernel of corn before answering. "I think forgiveness without justice is complicity, and justice without forgiveness is revenge. You have to find the balance. And what if justice isn't possible? Then you have to create it yourself. But that's harder because it requires courage." We said goodbye, exchanging phone numbers. Not because we had specific plans, but because there was something comforting in knowing there was someone in the world with whom I could have an honest conversation with no hidden agenda. That evening, for the first time in years, I ate something I had bought just for myself. Not leftovers from a meal prepared for others. Not something quick because I had to run off to an emergency. I bought a small but good quality steak, cooked it with garlic and herbs, and poured myself a glass of the wine I'd been saving for a special occasion that never came. I ate slowly, savoring every bite, listening to classical music on the radio. It was raining softly outside, and the sound of the drops against the windows created a perfect symphony for a dinner in solitude that didn't feel lonely, but peaceful. After dinner, I did something I hadn't done in decades. I called a friend. Brenda and I had been close during the early years of our marriages, but we had gradually drifted apart as my family responsibilities began to consume all my free time. She had invited me to parties, lunches, girls' nights out, but I always had to decline because one of my children needed something urgently. "Helen? Is that you?" Her voice sounded genuinely surprised when she answered the phone. "Yes, it's me. I know it's been a long time, but..." "Oh, it's so good to hear from you. I was just thinking about you yesterday. How have you been?" We talked for 2 hours. She told me about her grandson who had just graduated with an engineering degree, about the trip she took to Santa Fe with her book club friends, about the painting class she had started taking on Tuesdays. "And how about you? How are Sophia and Daniel?" For the first time in my life, I didn't lie about my children. I didn't defend them, minimize their faults, or invent idealized versions of our relationships. Honestly, Brenda, not so great. I'm going through a difficult situation with them. I told her everything. The house, the debt, the denial at Christmas, the forged signature, the contempt. Brenda listened without interrupting, without judging, without offering cheap advice. Helen, she said when I finished speaking, can I tell you something you might not want to hear? Tell me. What's happening to you is horrible, but it's also an opportunity. An opportunity to get your life back before it's too late. What do you mean? I mean, you're 67, not 97. You still have time to really live, for yourself, for your own dreams. But only if you have the courage to stand up for them. That night, I slept soundly for the first time in weeks, without the phone on my nightstand, without listening for emergency calls, without worrying about what problem I'd have to solve the next day. On Wednesday, I made a decision that would change everything. I went to the bank, but not to ask about the debt. I went to open my own savings account, separate from any account I shared with my children. I deposited my entire pension check, without setting aside a single dollar for the family emergencies that always came up. Then I went to a law office that Arthur had recommended. Ms. Davis was a woman in her 40s, with a modest but tidy office filled with law books and plants that showed someone took the time to care for them. Mrs. Baker, she said after reviewing all the documents I brought, what they did to you has a legal name: document fraud and familial financial abuse. It's a crime, and you have every right to defend yourself. What are my options? Several. You can press criminal charges against your daughter for using your identity without authorization. You can petition to have the mortgage nullified due to fraudulent inducement. You can demand the transfer of the actual deed to the house that's already legally in your name. Or you can negotiate an out-of-court settlement. Which do you recommend? That depends on what you want to achieve. Do you want to punish your daughter? Or protect yourself? The question forced me to think about what I really wanted. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't about hurting Sophia. It was about reclaiming my dignity and securing my future. I want to protect myself, I answered. But I also want them to understand they can't keep taking advantage of me. Then I recommend we start by demanding a legal transfer of the property and payment of the debt. If they refuse, we can escalate to more severe legal action. I left the office with a folder full of legal documents and something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. Not hope that my children would change, but hope that I could change my own situation. That afternoon, I wrote a formal letter. Not emotional, not pleading, not justifying, just legal and clear. Effective immediately, I demand that the $500,000 debt be transferred to the names of the property's actual beneficiaries, or that the house be sold and the debt settled. You have 15 days to respond. If you fail to do so, I will proceed with the corresponding legal action. I took it to the house in the estates myself and slid it under the door. I didn't ring the bell. I didn't wait for a response. I gave no explanation. I simply delivered my ultimatum and left. For the first time in my adult life, I had acted without consulting anyone, without asking permission, without worrying about hurting anyone's feelings. And it felt like flying. The 15 days passed like a countdown to an explosion we all knew was coming, but no one wanted to face. During those days, my phone started ringing again, but with a different tone. They were no longer casual calls asking for favors. They were desperate calls from my children trying to negotiate, to downplay, to find a way to make everything go back to how it was. "Mom, you can't be serious," Daniel would say every other day, with that childish voice he used to soften me up. "We're family. Families don't sue each other. Families also don't defraud each other," I would reply, maintaining a calm tone that surprised even me. Sophia tried a different strategy. She sent me flowers with a card that read, "To the best mom in the world, I love you. Let's talk." As if a dozen roses could erase months of missed payments and years of accumulated humiliation. But it was Robert who finally called on the 14th day, one day before my ultimatum expired. "Helen, we need to resolve this in a civilized manner. Come to the house tomorrow at 6 p.m. We're going to have a full family meeting to reach an agreement." A full family meeting? Sophia, Daniel, me, and Alexandra too. We want our daughter to hear this directly from you, so she understands the consequences of what you're doing. The cynicism of using Alexandra as an emotional shield filled me with a cold rage that settled in my stomach like molten lead, but I agreed to go. Not because I intended to back down, but because I wanted everyone to hear from my mouth, clearly and with no room for misunderstanding, that the era of Helen the Fixer was over for good. I arrived at the estates at 6 o'clock sharp. This time, I didn't bring Tupperware containers with food or gifts for my granddaughter, or the nervous smile that had been my family uniform for decades. I brought a folder with legal documents and a resolve that had solidified in my chest like reinforced concrete. Robert opened the door with a forced politeness that failed to hide his nervousness. In the living room, everyone was waiting for me. Sophia on the same leather sofa where she had called me embarrassing, Daniel in an armchair, and Alexandra huddled in a corner, looking utterly confused. "Grandma?" my granddaughter said when she saw me. "Is it true you don't love us anymore?" The question cut through me like a knife. I looked at Sophia, who had the decency to look uncomfortable, and I understood the strategy. They had decided to turn a 12-year-old girl into their emotional weapon, to make her believe that I was the villain of this story. "Alexandra, my love," I said, sitting on the edge of her chair and taking her small hands in mine. "I will love you for my whole life. But sometimes adults have complicated problems that have nothing to do with the love we feel for you children. But Mom says you're going to take our house away. She says we'll have to go live in a bad place because you hate us." I looked at Sophia again, this time with a fury that must have shone in my eyes because she shrank slightly on the sofa. "Alexandra, did you know that this house is registered under your grandma's name?" I asked, keeping my voice soft but clear. "No." "Did you know that your parents used my name to buy this house without telling me?" The girl shook her head, looking confusedly at her parents. "Did you know that I have to pay $500,000 for a house I can't live in because your mom thinks I'm embarrassing?" "Helen!" Robert shouted. "Don't involve the child in this." "I didn't involve her," I replied without raising my voice. "You involved her when you decided to use her as an emotional hostage. You involved her when you told her I was the bad guy in this story." I turned back to Alexandra. "Sweetheart, go to your room. The grown-ups are going to talk about boring things like money and papers. When we're done, I'll come say goodbye to you." Alexandra stood up slowly, looking at her parents as if for permission. Sophia nodded rigidly, and my granddaughter disappeared down the hall, dragging her feet. When the four of us were alone, I took the documents from my folder and placed them on the coffee table, in the exact same spot where I had thrown the bank papers 2 weeks earlier. "These are legal documents," I announced. "A civil lawsuit for document fraud and familial financial abuse. It's ready to be filed at the courthouse tomorrow if we don't reach an agreement tonight." Daniel leaned forward, his hands trembling. "Mom, you can't be serious. You're going to sue your own family?" "Daniel, my family already sued me. They sued me when they used my name without my permission. They sued me when they lied about a medical emergency to trick me. They sued me when they denied me in front of strangers." "But that was different," Sophia mumbled. "We didn't mean to hurt you." "You didn't mean to hurt me?" The question came out like a harsh laugh. "Sophia, do you know how much my monthly pension is?" "I don't know. $2,000? $1,800, and the monthly payment on this house is $3,200. You committed me to paying almost double my monthly income for a house I can't live in. If that's not meaning to hurt me, I don't know what is." Robert nervously adjusted his glasses. "Helen, we understand you're upset, but we can work something out. We can make you the actual owner of the house. You can come live here with us." "Live with you?" The proposition seemed so absurd I almost laughed. "With the man who tells his wife I'm embarrassing? With the woman who pretended not to know me? Like the grandmother living off the charity of her successful children?" "It wouldn't be charity," Sophia insisted. "It would be justice. The house is in your name. You have a right to live in it." "Sophia, if I wanted to live in a $500,000 house, I would have bought one with my own money and my own signature. I don't need you to give me crumbs of what you stole from me." The silence that followed was so tense you could cut it with a knife. The three of them exchanged glances like conspirators who had run out of options. Finally, Daniel tried the last resort. Direct emotional blackmail. "Mom, if you do this, it will be the end of our family. Alexandra will grow up without a grandmother, We'll lose the house? Maybe Robert's job will be affected by the scandal? Do you really want to destroy your own family over money? The question hit me exactly where Daniel knew it would hurt the most. For a moment, the old Helen wanted to emerge, the one who always gave in to keep the peace, who would rather be hurt than hurt others. But then I remembered Arthur's words. Forgiveness without justice is complicity. Daniel, I said with a calmness that surprised me, our family was destroyed the day you all decided I was more useful as a financial tool than as a person. It was destroyed when Sophia chose to deny me rather than defend me. It was destroyed when you decided my dignity was a fair price for your financial comfort. I stood up from the sofa and walked to the window overlooking the perfectly manicured garden, paid for with money that wasn't theirs. You're not losing a mother. You lost a mother years ago when you turned her into your personal ATM. What you're losing now is your ATM, and yes, that's going to hurt you more. That's not fair, Sophia exploded, finally losing her composure. We love you. Everything we did was for the good of the family. I turned to her with an expression that must have seemed compassionate, because I saw her deflate slightly. Sophia, if you loved me, you wouldn't have denied me. If you loved me, you would have talked to me before using my name to buy a house. If you loved me, you would have defended the woman who sacrificed everything to give you the education that allows you to live like this. I pulled one more document from my folder, this one notarized. But you were right about one thing. Families shouldn't sue each other. That's why I'm going to give you one last chance to resolve this without the courts. All three leaned forward, waiting for my proposal. You have 30 days to sell this house and pay off the entire debt. When it's settled, we will each go our separate ways. You will find a house you can afford with your own money and your own credit. And I will live the rest of my life without the obligation to finance anyone else's delusions of grandeur. And if we don't agree? Robert asked, his voice a thin thread. Then I file the lawsuit tomorrow morning. And believe me, the courts will be far less generous than I am. You could still lose the house, plus legal fees, plus the possibility of a criminal record for fraud. Daniel started to cry. Real tears of genuine panic from the man who had just realized he had forever lost the woman who had always solved his problems. Mom, please. Daniel, I am no longer your problem solver. I am now Helen Grace Baker, a 67-year-old woman who is going to live what's left of her life with dignity and self-respect. I walked to the door, but before leaving, I turned back one last time. 30 days. After that, I don't want to see you again unless you're coming to apologize. And not for the money. Apologize for treating me like I was worthless. I walked out of that house with the certainty that I had just closed a chapter of my life forever. A painful, humiliating chapter that had lasted far too many years. But I also left with the certainty that I was opening a completely different one. A chapter where I was the protagonist of my own story. The 30 days that followed were the most liberating of my adult life. For the first time in decades, I woke up each morning without a mental list of other people's problems to solve, without the invisible weight of family expectations pressing on my shoulders before my feet even touched the floor. The first change I made was to my house. For years, I had kept everything exactly the same, as if it were a museum of eternal motherhood. Daniel's room still had his high school football trophies and posters of teams that no longer existed. Sophia's room kept her porcelain dolls and the storybooks she read when she was 8. It was as if I had been waiting for them to become children again, to return to needing their mom in the pure and simple way that children need their mothers. But that week, with an energy I hadn't felt in years, I began to dismantle those shrines to the past. I packed up the trophies, donated the dolls to a children's home, and gave away the clothes that no longer fit anyone. I turned Daniel's room into my sewing room, a hobby I had abandoned when he was born because I didn't have time for such frivolities. Sophia's room became my personal library. I bought a comfortable second-hand armchair, a reading lamp, and for the first time in 30 years, I filled the shelves with books I wanted to read, not textbooks to help with someone else's homework or parenting manuals to be a better mother. Arthur helped me move the furniture. He had become my confidant, and, gradually, something akin to a sweet, senior companionship. There was nothing overtly romantic between us, but there was a warm company, The kind of friendship that emerges between people who have lived long enough to value honesty over appearances. You look different, he told me one afternoon as we were assembling my new bookshelf. Like you're more present. Present? Yes. As if you were a ghost of your former self before, and now you've come back to inhabit your own body. The observation struck me because it was accurate. For years, I had been like an employee in my own life, performing duties for others without truly living for myself. That same week, I signed up for a watercolor painting class at the local community arts center. It was something I had dreamed of doing since I was young, but had always postponed because there were more important things to do. Wash other people's clothes, cook for others, work to pay for other people's needs. My first painting was horrible. A lopsided landscape where the trees looked like giant broccoli and the lake looked more like a brown puddle. But when the teacher, a woman in her 60s named Victoria, told me, "Helen, I can see you have an artist's soul, you just need practice," I felt something I hadn't experienced in decades. Pride in something that was completely my own. I also started walking every morning in Zilker Park, not as a mandatory exercise to stay healthy and be useful for longer, but for the simple pleasure of moving my body under the sun, listening to the birds, and greeting other walkers who gradually became acquaintances and then casual friends. It was during one of those walks that I ran into Brenda, my old friend, who had now become my regular coffee companion on Thursday afternoons. "Helen," she said that morning, "I have to tell you something I've been thinking since we reconnected." "Tell me." "For all those years when you talked about your kids, I always felt something was off about the stories you told me. Too perfect, too generous on their part. Now, I understand you were telling me the version you needed to believe to survive." Her words made me reflect on how many lies I had told myself to justify the emotional and financial abuse. How many times I had reinterpreted selfishness as healthy independence, and manipulation as legitimate needs. "Do you think I was a foolish mother?" I asked her. "No, I think you were a mother desperate to be loved, and there are people who take advantage of that desperation." On the 20th day of my ultimatum, I received a call from Sophia. Her voice sounded different, smaller, as if she had been crying. "Mom, we've put the house on the market. There are several interested buyers. We think it will sell quickly." "I'm glad to hear that," I replied without any particular emotion. I also wanted to tell you that I broke up with Robert." That piece of information did take me by surprise. Why? Because when I told my boss what had happened with the house and the lawsuit, he told me that Robert had been handling some accounts irregularly. Apparently, this wasn't the first time he had forged documents. I felt a strange mix of satisfaction and sadness. Satisfaction because Sophia was beginning to see the consequences of her choices. Sadness because, despite everything, she was still my daughter, and I didn't like to see her suffer. And Alexandra? Alexandra is confused, but I think she's starting to understand that adults sometimes do stupid things. I told her the truth about what happened with the house. I told her we used your name without permission, and that it was wrong. It was the first time in years that Sophia had admitted to doing something wrong without justifying or minimizing it. "Where are you going to live?" "I found a small apartment in South Lamar. Nothing fancy, but it's what I can afford on my actual salary. Alexandra says she doesn't care as long as she has her own room and can still see her grandma." The mention of my granddaughter touched my heart, but no longer with the desperation of before. Now it was with the clean affection of someone who knows she can love without sacrificing herself. "Sophia, when the house is sold and the debt is cleared, maybe we can start over. But with clear rules this time." "What kind of rules?" "Rules where I am your mother, not your bank. Where you are my daughter, not my boss. Where we either respect each other or we don't have a relationship at all." There was a long silence on the other end. "Do you think that's possible?" "I don't know, honey. But for the first time in years, I'm willing to try." 2 days later, Arthur invited me to a classical music concert at the Long Center. He had bought 2 tickets because a person my age shouldn't go to cultural events alone. It looked sad. The theater was full of older couples, families, people who had made art a priority in their lives. For years, I had thought such activities were luxuries for people without real responsibilities. But sitting there, listening to Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, I understood that art wasn't a luxury, but a necessity of the soul that I had been denying myself for decades. During intermission, as we sipped champagne in the lobby, Arthur asked me a question that completely unsettled me. "Helen, what do you want to do most, now that your life belongs to you again?" The question resonated with me because I realized I didn't have an immediate answer. For so long, I had defined my desires based on the needs of others that I had lost touch with my own dreams. "I don't know," I admitted. "It's strange not to know." "It's not strange," he reassured me. "It's normal when you've been living someone else's life, but now you have time to find out." That night, I came home with a sense of possibility I hadn't experienced since I was young, and believed the future was full of adventures waiting for me. I poured a glass of wine, sat in my new reading chair, and for the first time in decades, I allowed myself to dream without practical limits. What did I want to do? Travel, write, teach, start a small business, have a romantic relationship at my age, adopt a dog, move to another city? All these possibilities floated in my mind like colorful balloons. And for the first time, none of them were accompanied by the question, "But what will my children say?" Or, "But how will I help them if I do this?" On the 28th day, my phone rang. It was Daniel. "Mom, the house is sold. We sign the papers tomorrow and the debt will be paid off. Everything will be settled." I'm very glad to hear that. I also wanted to apologize. Not just for the house, but for all these years. For treating you like you were our emergency hotline instead of our mother. The words hit me with an emotional weight I hadn't expected. It was the first time one of my children had explicitly acknowledged the pattern of abuse that had defined our relationships. "I accept your apology, Daniel, but I want you to know that doesn't mean things will go back to the way they were. I know, and that's okay. I think we all need to learn to live differently." That night, I slept with a deep peace, knowing that the next day I would officially be free of the debt I should never have had, but also free of something much heavier, the obligation to be the eternal sacrificial mother. The next day, when the papers were signed and the debt was cleared, I did something completely impulsive. I went to a travel agency and bought a plane ticket to Puerto Vallarta for the following week. I was going alone. For the first time in my adult life, I was going to travel for pure pleasure, not to accompany anyone, not to take care of anyone, not to solve anyone's problems. I was going to see the Pacific Ocean and remember who Helen Grace Baker was before she became the mother, the grandmother, the official family fixer. I was going to find myself. 6 months later, I'm sitting on the terrace of my new apartment in Puerto Vallarta, watching the sunset paint the sky in colors I never imagined existed outside of paintings. The Pacific Ocean stretches to infinity before me, and seagulls circle lazily over the waves that gently wash ashore. I didn't just come for a week, as I had originally planned. I came for a week and stayed forever. The apartment is small but bright, with an ocean view that gives me a different show every morning and evening. I'm renting it with the money I saved during all those years I thought I was helping my children, but was actually financing my own humiliation. It turns out that when you don't spend your money solving other people's crises, it accumulates faster than you'd imagine. My morning routine now includes coffee on this very terrace. While I read books I choose for pleasure and not for anyone else's educational obligation. Afterwards, I walk on the beach, collecting seashells I use to decorate the apartment, greeting other expats who, like me, decided it wasn't too late to start a new life. Arthur visits me every couple of months. It turns out he was also up for an adventure, and we've now developed a friendship that includes occasional trips to different towns along the coast. We are not a couple in the romantic sense, but we are life partners in the purest sense. Two people who chose each other without need, simply for the joy of sharing time and experiences. 3 months ago, I opened a small craft stall in the local market. I sell the watercolors I've been painting obsessively since I arrived, along with bracelets and necklaces I make from the shells I collect on my morning walks. I don't do it for the money, although it sells surprisingly well to tourists. I do it because I finally found something that is completely mine, something born from my creativity and not from my ability to solve other people's problems. My phone still rings, but now with a completely different rhythm. Sophia calls every Sunday, not to ask for anything, but to tell me how her life is going in the small apartment in South Lamar. She has learned to cook, something she never needed to do when she lived in the big house with a housekeeper indirectly paid for by me. She tells me that Alexandra is helping her with recipes, and that they've developed a closer relationship now that there aren't huge televisions and separate rooms keeping them apart. "Mom," she told me 2 Sundays ago, "I think for the first time in my adult life, I know exactly how much money I have and how much money I can spend. It's strange, but liberating." Daniel also calls, though less frequently. He got a steady job at an auto parts store. Nothing glamorous, but it's consistent. He tells me he no longer fantasizes about miracle businesses that will make him rich overnight. "It's boring," he says, "but I can sleep at night knowing I can pay my bills tomorrow." The relationship with my children is now distant, but honest. We no longer pretend to be the perfect family we never were. I no longer pretend their problems are my problems, and they no longer pretend I exist primarily to fix their lives. We talk like adults who know each other well and have affection for one another, but who have established clear boundaries about where each person's responsibility to the others ends. Alexandra visited me last month during her summer vacation. She came alone by bus, an adventure she planned and financed herself with money she had saved from her allowance. At 13, my granddaughter is learning lessons about independence and self-sufficiency that took her parents decades to understand. "Grandma," she said as we walked on the beach at sunset, "Mom says you used to be different, that you were always worried and always looked tired. And how do you see me now? Now I see you as a whole person, like you were only half of yourself before." The wisdom of children has always astonished me, but that particular observation resonated with me for days. Alexandra had put into words something I had felt but hadn't known how to express. For decades, I had been just a function, not a person. Yesterday, I received a letter from Brenda. She wrote to tell me that she had also made an important decision. She had enrolled in a photography course and was planning a solo trip to Europe next year. "Your example inspired me," she wrote. "Seeing how a woman our age can completely reinvent herself gave me permission to dream again. It's funny how freedom can be contagious. My decision to live for myself not only changed me, it also gave other people in my life permission to examine their own choices and make changes they had been postponing out of fear or inertia." This morning, as I was painting a watercolor of the sunrise over the bay, a memory came to me of that Christmas night that changed everything. I remembered myself standing at the door of that house in the estates, holding containers of food, being denied by my own daughter. I remembered the sharp pain in my chest, the humiliation, the feeling that my world had ended. But now, from the perspective of these 6 months of freedom, I understand that night wasn't the end of anything. It was the beginning of everything. That humiliation was the push I needed to wake up from a life that wasn't mine, to step out of a role that had consumed me until I was unrecognizable to myself. Without that terrible night, I probably would have remained the mother ATM until the day I died, perpetually sacrificing myself for people who had learned to see me as a resource instead of a human being. Life is teaching me that sometimes blessings come disguised as tragedies, that sometimes you need to be completely rejected to learn to value yourself, that sometimes you need to lose one version of your family to gain a more authentic version of yourself. Now, when I see young tourists walking on the beach with their families, I no longer feel envy or nostalgia for what I didn't have. I feel gratitude for what I have now. Time, peace, creativity, genuine friendship, and above all, an honest relationship with myself. The other day, a Mexican woman in her 50s approached my stall at the market. She had been looking at my paintings for several minutes, and finally asked how I had learned to paint so well. "I learned when I was 67, I told her. "It's never too late to start something new." "At 67? Her voice sounded incredulous. "Didn't you feel ridiculous, learning alongside younger people?" "At first, I did," I admitted. "But then I realized that feeling ridiculous is better than feeling empty." The woman bought one of my watercolors, but more importantly, she stayed and talked with me for an hour. She told me about her own postponed dreams, about the sacrifices she had made for her family, about the fear she had of being selfish if she started to live for herself. "Don't you feel guilty?" she finally asked. "Don't you miss being needed?" The question made me reflect on something I had been processing for these past few months. I used to think that being needed was the same as being loved, I replied. But in reality, being needed for the things you can provide isn't love. It's dependency. Real love doesn't need anything in return. When the woman left, I thought about those words that had come out of my mouth without planning. It was a truth I had learned by living, not by reading. This evening, as the sun sets over the Pacific and paints the water in golden hues, I feel a deep gratitude for the woman I was and the woman I have become. The woman I was made it possible for my children to have opportunities I never had. That wasn't a mistake. It wasn't wasted time. It was a choice I made with love, even if that love wasn't returned in the way I expected. But the woman I have become has learned that love for others cannot fully exist if it doesn't include love for oneself. That being a good mother doesn't mean disappearing as a person. That giving everything is not a virtue if you are left with nothing. Tomorrow I'm going to start a new painting, a series I've been planning about older women rediscovering their personal power. I want to capture in watercolor that expression I saw in my own mirror the first morning I woke up in Puerto Vallarta, the expression of someone who has come back to inhabit her own body, her own life, her own story. Because that is the lesson I most want to share. It's never too late to save yourself. It's never too late to say no to what hurts you and yes to what nurtures you. It's never too late to be the protagonist of your own life instead of just a supporting character in the lives of others. Have you ever experienced something similar to what I've told you? Do you know someone who has sacrificed so much for their family that they lost themselves in the process? Tell me in the comments. And if this story touched your heart, if it made you reflect on your own life, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps these messages reach someone who might need to hear that it's possible to start over, no matter how old you are or how long you've been living for others. Because we all deserve to be free, we all deserve to be respected, and we all deserve to live a life that is truly our own.